Hello. So today I'm going to provide my third month's findings of what I've observed and come to study and understand more in detail about politics in the region of Latin America, Southern Cone politics, Argentina, and this whole general global outlook from an Buenos Aires perspective more specifically. So I attended lectures related to China's developing relationship with Argentina. One of these lecturers, Gustavo Ni, was from Dai, an organization aimed at bridging China and Argentina's relationship, and discussed the importance for Argentines to become more open and accepting to China's role as an economic driver for the development of countries like Argentina. He pointed out that this is especially hard in a global news hegemon driven by the West, where news outlets like the BBC and Reuters speak about China's influence in a comparatively concerning tone than compared to with Western nations. What Mr. Ni pointed out is that China's importance for the region is already happening in organizations like Mercosur, with China being one of its biggest trading partners, with Argentina's soybean industry being a noteworthy example of this. Now, from this lecture, I was able to put into perspective just how impactful China is truly becoming in the global south. Coming from the US, we hear about this in brief, mainly in the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa and Asia. But by having Mr. Ni be there to speak personally about China's desire to support Argentina to an audience that wasn't entirely anti-China, but at least open to their involvement, including with the presence of Facundo Maciacia, the Argentine author of the book Todo lo que hay bajo el cielo, globalización con características chinas, who provided additional insight. Now, all this put into perspective this reality of global politics, that if I was in the US, not only would this have not been widely welcomed, but also is just not something that is being evaluated as thoroughly in US lectures as did this one here in Buenos Aires. I could see from this lecture that Argentina is also not entirely pro-US in the way that it wasn't an entirely abhorrent idea to believe that China could support Argentina more than any of the Western countries. This is providing further details that the crucial relationship that the US needs to maneuver with China in regions like Argentina to maintain at least some sense of mutual respect between the United States and Argentina, where what has been conventionally thought of as a region, Latin America, subjected to unequivocal American interests, is slowly being undermined in something like trade for countries like Argentina, and we already can see well with Brazil and something like BRICS. I also attended another lecture related to the energy transition at the global scale and the benefits of being here in Argentina for an expansive global view on this topic proved itself useful once again. The author of Por qué no queremos salvar el mundo by Federico Merkel spoke about China's role in the energy transition in the face of climate change, and pointed out that China has harnessed more green energies, including the creation of the largest solar power farm, and especially in the second Trump administration, China is trying to become more energy independent. Merkel pointed out that while 10 years ago, the solution to curbing climate change was based off of other countries' reactions, i.e., if they don't reduce their carbon emissions, then why should I? Now this has changed, with China showing itself in the field of energy as more of an autonomous body or state, in that they are making the transition regardless of Trump's apathy towards climate change. But this isn't to say that China is entirely on the save the planet side of the argument, as much as the economic pull is the more major factor for China's advancement in the global economy. And additionally, in a way, there is a political pull, as I have observed from this lecture, in that Argentines are also noticing China's accomplishments and are able to distinguish the actions of the US and China's leaders in this global problem of climate change. This again plays into China's role as a leader that can take effective change from something like the energy transition that is not being expressed within American political spheres, and is possibly showing a vulnerability for the US in attracting Argentines who want to work with China over its economics, or even in Merkel's comments about how the inefficiencies of democracies are showing how a great project like the energy transition is so complex and almost impossible to accomplish in Western democracies, yet shows itself more feasible for non-democracies like China. Now, in this way, China is positioning itself as an agent to curb climate change that in Argentina is becoming more noticeable. And it requires an understanding in the United States to acknowledge how we are to deal with this issue of climate change, as well as the messaging to countries like Argentina that are increasingly on the fence about their relationship with the hegemon of the United States versus the emerging Chinese state. The legislative elections in Argentina happened this week, and of course, Milei's party had won and has a stronger mandate in government. This was a widely unexpected result, as many national projections and the issues of corruption allegations and the frustration tainted Milei terribly, but in the end proved unimportant to voters, it seems. This might have to do with what Laura Gorbulla from the University of Torquato di Tella pointed out as a devil-you-know approach, as many voted for Milei as a solution to a leaderless Peronist party, the opposition party, that seems to be infighting over the direction of the movement and the future of general left-wing politics of Argentina. This was a sentiment Gorbulla linked to the growing younger population of Argentines, with about 50% of Argentines soon to be projected to be under 39 years old. As many of these Argentines have been growing up aware of so much political crisis that the idea of changing course just doesn't sound so appealing, and thus the familiarity of Milei, even if he is the so-called disruptive president we continue to perceive him as, is much stronger as a motivation to voters. There was also a certain level of transparency worth considering in these elections. Former President Carlos Menem based his presidency campaign on a clandestine cirugía sin anestesia, or surgery without anesthesia, kind of like a shock therapy approach, for dealing with the economy during his campaign, whereas Milei had essentially done the opposite in saying that same thing out loud for similar drastic economic approaches that he promised to institute in Argentina, which shows a level of transparency that perhaps many Argentines felt more comfortable with compared to La Fuerza Patria's incoherent leadership and promises. The general value of Argentines feeling consulted by the president and being told more clearly what his intentions are, even though they were portrayed quite drastically and to some respect rightfully so, they remain more acceptable to many voters, it seems, than compared to the other one. These elections were so interesting for me because there was a common belief actually that Milei's party was going to lose up to the elections, yet it proved itself otherwise, as did his 2023 campaign run. This was not the expected result for a midterm election of most incumbent presidencies in Argentina, or even like in the US and other democracies, as midterms tend to show a defeat for the incumbent in their party. The Peronists now face a huge issue becoming more unpopular, which was described by the lecturer as the party having a defeat almost as if they were the incumbent party. Additionally, I took into account the economic factors around this time, as many speculated that the initially perceived likely win for La Fuerza Patria would see a likely peso devaluation for a currency that continues to lose its values in such a short span of time, and how this might have motivated voters to seek the security of maintaining the perceived economic stability under Milei, rather than a risky overnight jump for the economy in the possible Fuerza Patria win. This, I believe, played against La Fuerza Patria and to the benefit of La Libertad Avanza, because even though the economy remains a huge concern for Argentines under Milei's leadership, as this was polled as one of the biggest concerns for Argentines up to this election, which is why many thought that Milei's party wasn't going to succeed. The idea of our economy getting worse under a possible Fuerza Patria win must have had some considerable influence in voters' behavior. Plus, Trump's deal to provide financial support to Argentina had Milei's party won seemed to already position these elections as a similar example of the global elections taking place that are based off Trump and his policies. This is something that we saw occur in Canada earlier this year, where Trump's tariff wars seem to have made way for the Liberal Party to secure governments to oppose against Trump's tariff threats. This could also entail just how persuasive the Trump effect has on global elections, especially in economic policy, as we've seen here in Argentina. And Trump's ability to just drive foreign policy is being expressed in the elections of countries like Argentina to persuade voters' voting behaviors. Now, this is, of course, all speculative and fresh news, but these are points worth considering regarding Argentina's relationship with the United States. And it makes me wonder just how much the American people are to this type of leadership and promising $20 million in support for a country that has little relevance to average Americans' lives, as I know isn't the most relevant to being in the San Francisco Bay Area, for example. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.